She was the perfect woman. I have no idea how I managed to catch her attention. Our relationship, our marriage, it was all perfect, except for one thing that neither of us could have foreseen. We met in college. She was working towards her English degree, and I was studying business. My major required me to take an English course, as did hers, and when she asked if the desk next to mine was taken, I was almost too stunned to answer. Kathy was beautiful in that artless way that some women have, and she smiled as I fumbled over my answer. That would have been the end of it for most people. I had fumbled my one chance, but Kathy wasn't like other women. She told me later that she had found it endearing, and she suspected that she was already a little bit taken with me when she sat down. When I saw you from across the room, I just knew that I wanted to get to know you better. We talked a little bit before class, comparing schedules and going over the usual getting to know you chit-chat. When the teacher arrived and class began, I found myself snatching little glances at her as she bent over her notebook. She caught me looking once, and to my surprise, I saw her smile at me. I was smitten after that smile, and when Kathy invited me to have lunch with her after class, I didn't even have to think about it. We were dating a week later, and as we got closer, should have noticed the warning signs of problems to come. I suppose I understand how it escaped my notice, though. Few people would have considered utter peace and pure relaxation a problem. When we walked hand in hand, I would get this feeling of utter peace throughout my body. When we kissed, I felt like nothing in the world could hurt me. She made me feel safe, made my problems melt away, and I knew I wanted more than the few hours a day we got to share with each other. Her college schedule made it difficult to go out more than twice a week, and my own class load kept me busy too. Part of the reason we had such little time together, though, was Kathy's commute to and from school. Kathy lived an hour and a half from campus, and couldn't begin to afford an apartment on her meager student income. The job I worked, plus the leftover grant money I had, paid the rent on my studio apartment, but not much else. Another person paying rent was nice, but I couldn't say that was the only reason that I offered to let her live with me. I also wanted her close to me. She made me feel good, made me feel safe. Being in her presence made the dark world in which I lived more tolerable, and I wanted that for more than a few hours a week. I offered to let her move in, and after a week of mulling it over, she agreed. That weekend, we combined our meager possessions, and I slept like a baby in her arms that night. As we began to spend our evenings together, the problems became more apparent. Problems is a terrible word for it, because in the beginning, it was more like a godsend. When we sat on the couch, our hands linked, I would find myself getting drowsy. When we would cuddle on the couch, our bodies pressed together, I would lose minutes at a time, and my eyes would grow heavier and heavier. The feeling of peace I found in her presence put me at ease, and that ease led to some of the best sleep of my life. I would sleep more deeply than I ever had before, and wake up after 8 hours refreshed and ready to start my day. Kathy seemed pleased with the attention. She'd only been with one other person before we started dating, but I could tell that she wondered why I hadn't slept with her yet. Some women's feelings would have been hurt by this, but Kathy had been raised in a very religious household, and must have assumed that I was simply waiting till marriage. The truth was that, while I would have loved to have slept with her, the sleeping was the problem. Whenever we got close, my arms around her and our bodies pressed together, I would find myself blinking and suddenly losing long periods of time. Sometimes she would lead me to bed, sometimes she would just sleep with me on the couch, but I would always wake up next to Kathy with a deep feeling of fulfillment. I had assumed that she was feeling the same way. I often thought that maybe this was the feeling that we gave each other, and it made me feel good to bring her the same sort of peace that she brought me. This went on for about 6 months, and I thought that things were going well. We went out to dinner, we had friends over, we went on dates, and seemed to be living together with few problems. I had been tentatively looking at rings, preparing to pop the question and make it official. Besides the matter of intercourse, I thought we were happy. Then one evening I came home from class to find her crying on the couch. I hadn't seen her that day. She'd been absent from the one class we had together, and when I'd called her, she said she was feeling sick. It was nothing serious. She maybe had a cold or something. I'd told her to feel better, hanging up so that I could get to my next class. But as I saw her looking up from her cupped hands, I knew something was definitely wrong. I had never seen her cry before, and it was so alarming that I could do little else but go to her and wrap my arms around her. She wouldn't tell me what was wrong, but I wish now that I had pressed her. I wrapped her in my reassuring arms and tried my best to comfort her in her time of need. My reassuring arms quickly turned into drawing her close and wiping her tears away. This soon led to kissing, which led to touching, and then to the bedroom. I won't bore you with the details, but I think you know how it ended up. I woke up the next day, her hands lightly stroking my hair, and fresh tears running down her cheeks. It was our first time, and I couldn't even remember how it had gone. When I asked her to marry me a month later, she seemed overjoyed. We had been living together for half a year now, and our love for one another was pretty clear. She wore my engagement ring with pride, showing it off to her friends, and we began to plan our wedding. I was too blind to see that she was making appointments with a campus therapist more often than she used to. I was too comfortable to notice the tears that sometimes came to her while we lay in bed together. I was too wrapped up in my own feelings to notice the prescriptions that appeared in the medicine cabinet. I was just so comfortable that I never wanted it to end. It's easy to get tunnel vision when you're spending all your time in the tunnel of love, I suppose. After that first time, however, I did make efforts to be better in the bedroom. Kathy was patient with me, seeing that I was trying, but I often found myself trying one moment and waking up the next. She was always quick to reassure me that it was nothing to be ashamed about, but I knew it hurt her deeply to have a partner incapable of being intimate with her. So, I set out to find the reason for my sleeping fits. And so, I began to make doctor's appointments of my own. I said that the appointments were for her benefit, but I was honestly more concerned that I might have a real problem brewing. The last thing I wanted to discover at 22 was that I was a narcoleptic or had a problem with my brain or something. I explained what was happening to my doctor, and he was helpful, if not a little over-jovial. Kids your age shouldn't be having any sort of problems in that department, but we'll get you checked out, he assured me, with a smile and a pat on the shoulder. I was tested for every sleep disorder imaginable. I was given prescriptions of my own, but none of them seemed to work. I took supplements, signed up for new drugs that had just hit the market, and joined medical test groups. Despite all this, though, no one seemed to have any answer for what was going on. I was just so comfortable with my fiancée that I couldn't help but fall asleep in her arms. It would have been sweet if it wasn't worrying me to no end. We had decided on March for our wedding, the first anniversary of our meeting, and I was determined to make it special for her. I was as helpful and dutiful as a boyfriend/fiancé could be. I went with her to every stage of the planning. I picked out cake toppers, helped with seating charts, picked out menus, visited and put down a deposit on the venue, and comforted my soon-to-be wife every step of the way. The saving grace, of course, was that I could put my performance issues down as pre-wedding jitters as the day crept closer and closer. The wedding was easily the happiest day of my life. I stood at the altar, sweating in my rented tux, waiting for the moment she would arrive. The crowd huddled behind me in a murmuring throng of excited tension, and it felt like 1,000 years had passed before the music began from the organist. When I saw her in her dress, gliding down the aisle like a dream, I fell in love all over again. She was beautiful, her tears now ones of joy, and I never regretted asking her to join her life to mine. We exchanged rings, spoke vows of eternal love, and then walked from the church as husband and wife. As we stood for pictures, the venue having set up on the lawn to host our reception, I made ready to fulfill my end of tonight. I drank champagne for toasts and black coffee by the cup. I took caffeine supplements before we climbed into the car and left for our honeymoon suite. As she went into the bathroom to take her dress off, I walked around and tried my best to keep my heart racing. I told myself over and over again that tonight would be different, that tonight would repay for all the rest. I wanted nothing but to make her feel special and to make tonight one to remember. When she came out of the bathroom, the two of us standing before each other as husband and wife, I felt like I was possessed with all the energy and serenity I would ever need. When we woke up the next morning, intertwined as we always were, there were no tears on her cheek, only a look of fulfillment I knew all too well. We settled into married life easily, and it was as though nothing had changed. Despite my best efforts, however, I couldn't recapture the magic of that night. Whenever I was in her arms, whenever we were close, I couldn't help but fall into that feeling of utter serenity and slip off to sleep. It was as if those feelings had multiplied after the wedding, She made me feel like I could die of happiness. I couldn't hold her hand as we drove anymore, lest I find myself listing off the road. If I cuddled on the couch with her to watch a movie, I would inevitably miss over half of it. I loved nothing more than to bask in that feeling of serenity that seemed to waft around her. But I also felt guilty as she seemed to return to her silent, tearful nature. I couldn't help myself. I was powerless to resist the pull of her, and I was powerless to do anything when I was in her arms. I began to notice as her mental health got worse, though. Kathy was moody and manic by turns. Sometimes she wanted nothing to do with me, only to cry and demand my attention. I often missed classes because I was afraid to leave her by herself, and I finally insisted that we go see a doctor. The doctor said this was normal. Her medication just needed to be adjusted. Despite their best efforts, though, the new pills and the adjustment of the old pills seemed to do no good. Our lovemaking was non-existent, despite my best efforts. I tried to comfort her, tried other means of intimacy, attended couples therapy with her, tried my best to keep her from imploding. In the end, though, it did no good. I remember the night it happened as vividly as I remember our wedding day. I was lying in bed, Kathy still in the bathroom, and I was worried about the appointment we had the next day. They planned to try her on a new battery of medications, and Kathy seemed to be willing to give it a try. She had wandered around the house like a fretful ghost all day, and I'd been keeping an eye on her until this very moment. I felt like if we could just get to bed, if we could just fall asleep in the comfortable embrace of each other's arms, everything would be fine. She climbed into bed, and something about her face didn't seem right to me. Then she opened her arms, and I was like a meteorite hurling into a planet's gravity. "I love you," she said, kissing my forehead as her heart raced against my chest. "I'll always love you." I fell asleep, wrapped in the arms of my love, sure that as long as I remained here, everything would be okay. I woke up, however, to discover that I was sleeping next to a corpse. I called the paramedics, but there was nothing they could do. She'd been dead for hours as I slept. Kathy had taken an overdose of sleeping pills before tucking in for the night. It was almost ironic in the end, and the note she had left on the nightstand told me everything I needed to know. All these years, I had believed that I was giving her the same feeling that she was giving me. It turned out I was nothing but a thief in the night. Kathy said that her mental decline had started almost the day we met. The balance and fulfillment that I had been expecting was a mirror to the anxiety that she was feeling. She had taken my inability to stay awake as something she was doing. She was boring me. I was disinterested. She was failing as a woman as a result. The longer it lasted, the more she felt like she was the cause. She wanted to please me, to be a good wife, but the longer it went on, the more inadequate she felt. She loved me. She never wavered in her love for me. But being with someone who was physically uninterested in her was killing her, physically and emotionally. She had finally decided that if sleeping next to her was what I wanted, then she would give me what I wanted. We would both sleep soundly for a change. I'm writing this as I sit in the viewing room of the funeral parlor. They gave me an hour before her cremation, a final viewing for her grieving husband. I could tell by the way they keep looking at me that I must look terrible. I've been awake for the past 5 days, and the bags under my eyes look more like suitcases. I've become accustomed to her presence, to the way she makes me feel, and now my sleep is all but non-existent. I'm like a junkie with no smack, and my fix lies in that box across the way, looking as lovely as the day we met. I think that when I get done with this, I may climb into that simple pine box with her and see if I can find some sleep. I can almost feel whatever she possesses from my seat here, and I want to see if she still possesses it even in death. Who knows? Maybe I'll pull the lid closed behind me, and they'll simply slide me into the chute as well. It seems fitting somehow that the two of us should sleep forever, two souls at rest for all time. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. Let's go ahead and thank our patrons before we go. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Xaronana for being our Ghost Reader tier contributor. And thanks to Glen Jenkins for being our Ghost Rider tier contributor. Thanks, everybody. We just couldn't do the show without you. If If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video I do, and have your stories a day early, at least on the Wednesday and Friday ones. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.